You're listening to the Cooking from Scratch podcast. In today's episode, we're delving into a story that beautifully blends culinary expertise with a passion for literature. Our guest is Matt Miller, a former chef who has traded in his kitchen knives for a different kind of treasure trove, a culinary bookstore. Matt now owns and curates a bookstore that's a haven for food lovers, aspiring chefs, and anyone who finds joy in the written word about food. Join us as we chat about the transition from chef to bookstore owner, the treasures that fill Matt's shelves, and how his culinary background enriches the experience of finding the perfect cookbook or food memoir. Whether you're a culinary enthusiast or a book lover, this episode promises a delectable mix of stories and insights. So grab a cup of something cozy and settle in as we turn the pages of Matt's journey. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Aaliyah Iden, and with over 15 years of cooking in professional kitchens and at home for my family, this is the first non-cooking cooking podcast that shows you how to make your homemade meals easier and more delicious so you can feel inspired and motivated to cook in the midst of your busy life. We go behind the scenes and tap into the stories and inspiration of chefs, bakers, farmers, and other culinary professionals to reveal what they're up to in their kitchen right now and what their favorite at-home dish is to cook from scratch. This is the Cooking from Scratch podcast. I'm happy to have Matt Miller here, welcoming him to the podcast. He's from Kitchen Lingo Books in Long Beach. Thank you, Matt, for being here. I'm happy to have you here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So big burning questions first. I'm really curious why you decided to start a bookstore. I don't know, is it one of those things you wake up and you go, man, I really need to start a bookstore, a culinary bookstore at that?
There were a lot of little factors.
Okay.
My sort of stock answer is that I like food and I like alphabetizing things.
Cool.
But it's
relatable.
I really enjoy reading about food. And cookbooks are just one small section of that discussion. And I wanted to see if there was anybody else that was interested in it. I figured that the cookbook industry and publishing is the only part of publishing that hasn't gone down and actually continues to go up and get more popular. Cooking shows are more popular than they've ever been, with game shows and travel shows and stand-in store cooking shows and family competitions and junior competitions. I figure there have to be more people in Long Beach interested in food than just me. So I figured, why not give it a try, do something that I'm really interested in doing, and if it works, great. If not, I tried.
Yeah, that's
and it
great
seems to be
information.
working well.
I didn't know that about publishing in books. I always just assume, books, they say books are Amazon now or whatever, like an in-person bookstore. I never thought that it would have the statistics of selling more than they ever have, you're saying? Or
well, yeah, the cookbook, when it comes to publishing, there are so many different kinds of books out there, but cookbooks are strong and steady and getting more popular. And I think that there are a lot of reasons for that, mostly because it's a generational thing. I think a lot of people who raised families and cooking was their chore. They had to cook for their family. They had cookbooks. They were into cookbooks. It was the one thing that everyone got them for all holidays and birthdays. But when the kids grow up, they don't want to cook anymore. It's easier to Google everything. It's easier to just look up a recipe on their phone. But when you're talking about the generation of people who grew up with an iPad in their lap and an iPhone in their pocket, the idea that you can actually open up a book, have a series of recipes, you don't have to sift through 400,000 different versions of the same thing, wonder which one's going to work. You don't have to worry about an ad loading while you're trying to figure it out. You don't have to scroll through somebody's self-important
annoying.
Yeah. And just when you're looking at something, everything shifts. Or it's just, there are so many different reasons that people don't like reading recipes off of their phones or off of their computers or iPads. And people who are of that age where they're starting to take care of themselves and getting interested in cooking. Well, looking at a computer screen isn't new to them. It's not a novelty. It's just the way. The novelty is having an old book or having a new book, a book that you can open up, mark down your preferences, less salt, less sugar, more sugar. Use this instead of that. You can keep your own record of it, and you can dog ear a page. You don't have to try to remember which link you click to find the thing that you liked. Yeah, so it's a discussion happening to a different group of people.
So that leads me to my next question. Like, so is your audience, do you notice them being mostly younger? Because that's really surprising to me. I was thinking that cookbooks are more for people our generation and older. But you're saying it's becoming more of a novelty for people who, like you said, grew up with an iPad in their lap.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. And then you have shows like The Bear, which is so popular right now.
True.
And
Yes.
and the guy in the show has this huge collection of cookbooks. And now young cooks are beginning to realize that it's cool to have a huge collection of cookbooks that you use as reference. Yeah, I've got and that's what old chefs, like old school chefs, do. Is people who cook for a living, they use cookbooks as reference points. I know a chef in New York who Chef Peter Echo has. He tells me 3,000 books in his collection, and we talk books. We just chalk books all the time. But
yeah, that's enviable for sure.
But the thing is, when there are people of a certain age, I should say, that I hear this all the time. People, as they walk past my store, they'll go, "Oh my God, I'm trying to get rid of my cookbooks," or "Who wants a cookbook? You can you Google everything now. Nobody's looked at something. Nobody does that anymore." Or I have people coming going, "Yeah, you want them, you can take them. You can have them. Just take all my cookbooks. I want to get rid of them."
Guilty of that. That's what I did
totally.
last year.
Yes, that's right. I have some of yours, don't I?
Yes.
People purge, they downsize. They don't want to have these old cookbooks anymore. But the thing about cookbooks is they become part of people's families. They've been sitting on your shelves for so long that if somebody's really into food, then you tend to not get rid of them. So there are whole collections that are left over when people pass away, and the kids don't know what to do with them. But there are people who, like I was saying before, who resent cooking. They didn't cook because they loved to cook and they wanted to feed their families or feed their, something like that. They cook because they had to feed their families. Right. And I think it's primarily women. A woman's job was to cook and clean for the family. The husband's job wasn't his job, actually. He got to cook. So he cooked the fun things like the barbecue on the weekends. He got to grill. He was the grill guy. A lot of women, they cook to feed the family, not for the fun of it. So they resent I find a lot of women of a certain age resent cooking. And Absolutely. The moment they don't have to anymore, they don't want to. I understand that. So yes, I think that I do have a lot of people of all different ages who are interested in cooking and food writing. But I do find that the people who are really excited about cookbooks tend to skew younger.
That is really interesting. One of the articles I read about your store it used the word food fanatics. And I found that to be a really interesting term. I mean, I guess I understand it, but it seems pretty extreme to me. Is it only food fanatics who want to buy a cookbook?
I don't know. It depends on where you read that.
It was on whatever. I was like, okay, time to do a little research. And one of the articles that posted up, the title was Long Beach new bookstore for food fanatics. I might have been in quotes, and I was like, okay, food fanatics.
I don't remember which that
article
one.
That was.
I haven't had many articles written about me, so I wonder which one that was.
Yeah, I don't know.
But no, I don't think that it's food fanatics. I think
right.
What is a food fanatic? It's people say the universal language is. You've heard the universal language is math. It's the one thing mathematicians and scientists can communicate with numbers. But I think that isn't exactly true, because everybody eats, and not everybody can figure out how to calculate a tip. So, I think that food is really the universal language. Food fanatics I don't think that's quite it. Um, it's like a foodie. What exactly is a foodie? I
Exactly.
think every generation has. I mean, back in the 50s, people called themselves gourmands, and
That's right.
it's
It's such a dated
I think
term.
yeah,
Love it.
I think that identifying as somebody who appreciates food and loves to eat, or
Yeah.
loves to savor something, experience new, have new experiences through food. Um, I think that I wouldn't call these people fanatics as much as I'd call them open-minded. There
Right.
are people who are only going to eat the OG Long Beach taco, the OG burrito wrapped in cheese, wrapped in bacon,
Right.
uh,
Right.
the greasy spoon on the corner that's been there for 50 years. There are people who are stuck in what they eat and they don't want to venture any farther out. And there are other people who want to travel through food. You may not be able to get on a plane and leave the country, but you can certainly get a book and experience all the technique, the flavors, the ingredients that come from another culture around the world. And that's the one of those unique things about cookbooks specifically is you can not only travel through food, it's not an around the world thing. It's a time you can go forward or backward in time. You can experience what somebody was eating in 1930 based on the ingredients that they had available, because that's in the recipe. You can look into the future and look at the next molecular gastronomy, the next avant-garde plating, the next chef that's doing that, and see what they're doing, and you can try to recreate that in your house. It's
Yeah, that is one of the
yeah,
things I love the most about food is the story and the history. It's not recipes to me are boring when they're just a recipe. Like I will open up a recipe and I'm like, okay, that's great, but I need the story behind the recipe. And that's kind of where my background of cooking from different cultures around the world comes in. And I think that's what makes a dish taste better if you're a bit more informed on the story of what you're making. And I think that's what cookbooks offer, really. A lot of them
it's some of
can.
them. I would
Yeah.
agree, but
Or maybe those are
when
just ones that I bought the whole time when I was collecting, probably.
no, I think they do, but I think that the story started relatively recently. When you look at
Mm.
cookbooks starting going back to, I don't know, when you look at cookbooks before social media, I would say a lot of those cookbooks were just recipes. There was like maybe a little, hey, this is what we make at our restaurant. This is a great twist to use Brussels sprouts. Try adding this, and here's a recipe. But there wasn't a story attached to it until blogging started, I think.
That's
When
true.
blogging started, suddenly people had like movies like Julie and Julia, where Julie Powell blogged about her experience writing, teaching herself to cook by going through mastering the art of French cooking. Um, I think that it's when blogging started, that's when telling your story, because you had to write something. The whole point was to write, not to list a recipe. So I think that the publishing world is following that. Then the trend now with cookbooks is to do just that. It's to tell the story. Oddly enough, that's the biggest complaint about most online recipes and blogs now, because the bloggers are kind of like fading out when it comes to the for lack of a better term, the mommy blogger website, where it's the wholesome family recipes with good whole foods ingredients, that sort
Right.
of thing. Where there's we had this wonderful experience eating this on our lavish vacation through Italy. Who
Right.
cares?
Yeah.
Uh,
No,
but
totally.
and that's what everyone wants to scroll past when you're looking up a recipe online. But in cookbooks coming out today, there is a story component to it. It's very essay driven, anecdotes that explain just that. What you're saying is why this recipe is significant. But I
Yeah.
think that what's more important is not why the recipe is significant to the author, but why the recipe is significant in the grand scheme of the hundreds of thousands of millions of recipes out there. Why this
Absolutely.
one?
And I'm
What's
interested in that
special?
aspect because for me, I'm really focused on the quick weeknight cooking thing. And I'm not necessarily looking up a recipe when I need to make dinner on a Tuesday night. I want to remember something. And so for me, if I have a story in my head that I remember, I'm like, oh, there's that one recipe. What was it? And I might have jotted down like, oh, it takes these 5 ingredients, but I want to be able to just walk into my kitchen and make it. I don't want to have to look it up. I don't want to do any of these things. I want to just remember it. And to me, that's what the story kind of helps me do, is it keeps it like in the Rolodex of my brain. I can go, oh, right, that one thing. So that's to me what I'm connected to the story. Part of the reason I'm connected to the story, I think.
Okay. I think that when you discover a recipe, you eventually make it your own. You'll follow the recipe to the letter the first couple times you make it, and then eventually you go, okay, I got the gist of it, and you'll start turning it into your own recipe. But having that one base recipe that you read about through a story, or you discover in a book, or you discover through a newsletter, you did a recipe for tomato sauce that was just tomato paste. Right. It's like, yeah, tomato paste, pasta water. There you go. Add a little of this, add a little of that, and it's like, yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Or famously, Marcella Hazan's tomato sauce recipe.
Exactly.
Her 4-ingredient pasta recipe that Rebecca Mae Johnson wrote an entire book about it. Yeah, are you familiar with this? It's,
I've heard of it.
Small Fires. It's
Okay. Yeah.
She numbered every time she made this tomato sauce recipe, and how it slowly went from learning it as a young college student to making it differently as she grew up.
Yeah, I think you've told me about that before.
Yeah.
Speaking of growing up, do you have an early cooking memory for you? Like, what was food like cooking? Was that existent for you in your early years growing up? Do you have any memories
of cooking?
Or meals, like favorite meals from being a small person, a child, a teenager, a young adult?
Well, yeah, of course. I have some great memories of food. I used to love going to restaurants. As a kid, it was exciting. You know, as a family, I never traveled as a kid. My parents didn't take us many places, and it was fun to pretend that you were in Italy because you were sitting in a theme Italian restaurant, or you were in 1950 because you were at a 50s style diner, or in a Chinese restaurant. And we used to go to a Chinese restaurant called Qinghua, and the table had glass on it, and underneath the glass was Chinese newspapers, and it was so much fun.
I love it. Did you do you remember learning to cook at all, like frying an egg, or I don't know, cooking next to somebody in your family or a friend? Or do you have an early cooking memory like that?
I have a couple. My father pretty much did all the cooking, and I was allowed to grill. That was my thing, making hamburgers on the grill. As a kid, I remember somebody teaching me to make a lemon meringue pie once when I was little. The thing was, my parents, when I was a child, my mother was really against competition. She didn't want any of her kids to do the same thing as the other one. My brother, I had an older brother that was really into cooking. He was really into food and loved cooking shows and Julia Child, and took home ec classes in middle school, and he was really excited about it. Being younger, I wanted to do everything he did, but cooking was his thing, so it wasn't allowed to be my thing, no matter how interested I was. So I really didn't learn to cook until I was an adult. I was probably in my very early 20s, and I was working in dinner theater, and I was working in, and and it was the same meal every night. And the kitchen would prepare the exact same meal for every show, every time. And I went into the kitchen. I was really interested in learning to cook, and I remember asking. I wanted to steam vegetables, and I said, "So how do you steam vegetables?" And two of the guys in the kitchen rolled their eyes, and the chef comes over and he looks at me. And he goes, "What you do is you take the vegetables and you trim them a little bit, and then you want to put them in just about a quarter of an inch of water, and put a lid on them, and let it boil. And when the vegetables turn a bright color, that's when they're done. That's steaming." He was so serious about teaching me. He didn't laugh at the fact that I should have probably known how to do that. And it was really like saying, "So tell me, how do you breathe?" And
Right.
yeah, he took it really seriously. And then after that, I'd walk in and go, so, hey, I tried that steaming vegetables thing. That's great. How do you cook a lobster? And
That's
from
great.
there, I just kept asking questions, and eventually, a couple of years later, started working on a line in the kitchen. And the chef there goes, "You ever worked in a kitchen?" I said, "Nope." He goes, "Okay, start chopping those vegetables. Let me see where you are." And I started chopping a bunch of vegetables, and he goes, "All right, we're going to stop here. First of all, this is how you hold a knife. This is where
Nice.
you put your fingers.
Right.
This is how you do this." And then we went through all the different classic French cuts, and we went how to prep for things, how you prep for a specific thing that you're going to make. He taught me mise en place and sauce making, and it was just it was a kind of a okay, you got it, good, you're on your own. And next thing I knew, I was a line cook.
Right.
Uh,
It's kind of standard. That's how it goes.
yeah, yeah.
In my experience.
Yeah, and I
I
just
love it.
I love it. It was like a duck to water. He said, "You put your hand here, hold this like this," and then I was done. That was it. It was
Love it.
I just fell in love with cooking.
So how does a
Yeah.
cookbook store owner, what do they make at night when they go home? Do you have 17 cookbooks laying open at home and you're trying all these different things? Or do you go home and do you eat, when you cook dinner, something really simple? Or is it something you've looked in that day in a cookbook and gone, oh shoot, I need to try that? Do you have a backlog of things you really want to try to cook? I can't imagine being surrounded by all those cookbooks all the time. That's all I'm saying.
I don't really use cookbooks that often.
Right.
I love using them for reference. Sometimes I want to learn how to make a component. I want to know how to make a specific sauce, or do one thing. There's one thing I want to make, and I'll go from cookbook to cookbook trying to find that one recipe. But no, there is one book that I started cooking from. I mean, there are a couple that I really like, and but I'm not one of those people that sits and flips through a cookbook and says, "Oh yeah, I'm going to make that today," and then I make my grocery list and I go to the store and I get all the ingredients and then I plan my day around cooking this meal. I just don't have time for that. I get home, and so I kind of having never having never been one of those people that was good at learning. I was never very good at learning things when people would say, "Here, you need to learn how to do this." I was always really good at picking up things when I wanted to pick them up. So going home and looking through a cookbook, it's counterintuitive. I've never been like that. I wanted to learn how to cook. I went out and I learned how to cook. I started cooking commercially. I got really good at it. At least I think I got really good at it. I opened a restaurant. I opened a bunch of restaurants. They were very well received. Everything I've done, I just invent the recipes myself because I think I have a really strong understanding of the core of how to start cooking. And I think one of the reasons that people need cookbooks is because they don't know where to start. They walk into their kitchen, they look at their refrigerator, they have no idea. But when I walk into my kitchen, I look in my refrigerator, or I look in my pantry, it's sort of like playing the game Chopped, where you open up the basket, you got a bunch of random ingredients, how are you going to put them together? And that's what I do.
That's my favorite way to cook,
Yeah.
man. It's so fun.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know what it is. Maybe it'll be good. Maybe it won't. I did this and this and this. Should be good. Yeah.
And the name of this podcast is Cooking from Scratch intentionally, because this is what I'm trying to teach people how to do. Because I've met a lot of people in my cooking classes I taught for a long time. They need the recipe and they're asking me these questions like, but I do this or do I do this? And I'm like, yes. And they're like, but no, I need an answer. Yeah. Which one? And I'm like, well, you're going to learn one way or another. And I try to give them an answer. Well, if it was me, I would do it this way, and then go from there. But I think it's faster and easier to kind of just do it Chopped style. Go into your kitchen, see what you have, if you have a well enough stocked kitchen, and just kind of go from there.
But yeah, you have to have the confidence. Mm-hmm. And that confidence comes from practice. And it comes from having a base knowledge of things, I think. You know that if if you gave me a taste of something you were making, and I would say maybe that sauce needs to be thicker, maybe you should thicken that sauce somehow. You'd go, oh yeah, maybe I'll just. You would probably make a roux. You'd add the roux to the sauce. You'd thicken the sauce with that, and then we try it again and go, okay, now that texture actually works. But most people aren't going to know to thicken a sauce with a roux, or all the different ways you can thicken a sauce. They're not going to know. They're not going to know that if you undercook pasta just a little bit and then throw it in the sauce, it's going to absorb the sauce. You need less sauce ultimately. They just know you cook it because the package says to cook it for 20 minutes. So after 20 minutes, it's done.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But then again, I think there are people, like I said, that I've never been particularly good at learning. When somebody says, here, learn this. Other people are. Other people were very good in school at picking up a book, reading the chapter, or looking at the instructions, following the steps, and doing their homework. They need a book. But when it comes to just making it up as they go along, they can't do it.
Yeah. Different learning
some people,
styles. Yeah, for sure.
Some people need sheet music. Other people can just play.
Yeah, this is very true. I love the fact that you have all these workshops. You host so many workshops in the bookstore. I actually just discovered the sake one earlier. Today I was looking on your website. I'm like, ooh, sake. And then we have a sake store in Long Beach. Apparently, I didn't know this either.
Yeah, it's on cool. Pine. Yeah.
How important do you think those workshops are to kind of fostering culinary culture? Because a lot of what I'm hearing you talk about is culinary culture and history. And do you find who is coming into these workshops? Are they one particular community? Is it people from all walks of life? What are you finding?
It's people from all walks of life, definitely. It's people
Not
who are
just
curious.
Fanatics.
I think everybody during the pandemic lockdown decided it was time to learn to make sourdough because you couldn't buy a loaf of bread. You couldn't buy yeast. You couldn't buy flour. But if you had flour and you didn't have yeast, there's got to be a way to do it. A lot of people jumped onto this sourdough bandwagon and turned to YouTube to learn how to make sourdough. I mean, you've made it. It's not that hard. No. It's difficult to do well, but it's not hard to do it in general. And there are little tricks, and there's just some questions you can't ask a YouTube. You can't watch a video and stop and say, all right, mine's not doing that. What am I doing wrong?
Right.
So like our sourdough shaping class, I think a lot of people who have made sourdough before came in because they wanted to have hands-on experience. They wanted to have hands-on training and be able to ask the question and say, yeah, all right, this is how I do it at home. What am I doing wrong? And the teacher can say, yeah, you see this, you're building a surface tension. That rip right there, that's breaking your surface tension. We got to start over. And that's how that works. I think it's people who are curious. Again, you asked me about the food fanatics. I think that there are a lot of people they're not fanatics, but they're certainly curious. And the point of my store isn't necessarily just to sell cookbooks. It's to sell an experience. I don't think, the way I like to explain it to people is that if you wouldn't walk into a store and say, a book on algebra, that sounds interesting. But if you were taking a math class, suddenly an algebra book makes a little bit more sense to have on your shelf.
Yeah. And they want the result. They want the result out of the cooking. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is I'm trying to create an experience to go with the book. And that's not just the classes that we offer. So we do the sake tasting class, and we've got we've done sourdough shaping, fermentation.
The tapache, that's the other one.
Tapache,
that's what coming. It's called, right? Oh man.
Yeah. We've got, we did kimchi, sauerkraut. We're doing a pasta class coming up. We'll do a sausage making class. We've taught mushroom hunting and wild foraging. We've taken field trips to prawn farms. It's about understanding the source of the food, where it comes from, how it grows, how it gets to your table. It's one thing to say, isn't this great? It's farm to table. It's another thing to have a garden and grow your tomatoes and then pick them and do whatever you want with them. You have more respect for your ingredient when you know how it got to your plate, I think. And Absolutely. Attaching an experience to the book, I think, is more important than the book alone.
Absolutely. Why do you think people don't like to cook? Do you think it's because they're disconnected, or just I know you mentioned one before, maybe women who were kind of not forced to, but it was their chore to cook growing up. And so now if they don't have to do it, they just don't want to do it. But do you have an opinion or any experience as to why people don't like to cook? Is it only because they don't know how, or they just don't have an affinity for it, or?
Well, I think that people who are the people who cooked for their families and resented it at heart is just one demographic.
Right.
There are, and saying that people who grew up with a tablet in their lap are more interested in cookbooks, but those are of the people who are interested in cooking. When you have the people who aren't interested in cooking, it's for a number of reasons. From they don't know how, and it's one more thing they don't want to have to learn. Why would you learn to cook when there's an app for that? Fast food is easy. You can tap an icon on your phone and your credit card information is already there, and food gets brought to your door ready to eat in, done. There it is. So why bother to learn to cook? Also, there are so many restaurants, and we're being told now that you have to support your local restaurants because restaurants are having such a hard time. Yeah, they're having a hard time, but is that hard time any different than any other hard time? Restaurants are charging more than ever by the way I see it.
Yes.
I've been in the restaurant business. Restaurants are always having a hard time. That's what restaurants are. They're hard.
Yeah.
It's, if you have a full dining room this week and a half full dining room next week, you wonder what happened.
Right.
Where'd everybody go? And then you justify that, there's a street fair down the street. Restaurants are always having a hard time.
Yeah.
Not that I don't feel for the people who work in restaurants, but let's look at there are so many restaurants and there are so many apps and so much fast food and so many, well, here, at least in California, Southern California, there are street vendors everywhere. Why bother to learn to cook? It's like being in New York and not learning to drive. Why would you need to learn to drive?
Why
Take
would
a train,
you
a bus, or a cab.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
But the app goes way back in history. We're just with our food delivery apps now. This is like living in the future, in somebody's fantasy future from hundreds of years ago, where people used to fantasize about a place where all you had to do was sit at home, not get dressed. You didn't have to go out and work every day, and your food came right to your door ready to eat. This was an actual fantasy that people used to have.
I love it. We're living in the future.
Why not? Yeah, we're living in the future. Why not enjoy it? So,
all right. Maybe putting you on the spot a little bit, but what's in your freezer right now? Do you know what's in your freezer right now?
What's in my freezer right now?
Besides ice.
Yeah. Bananas.
Smoothies?
Bananas are in my freezer. Well, you never know, because when you freeze bananas, it breaks the glucose cellular walls. So suddenly they become sweeter and they're easier to cook with if you want to do a smoothie, or you want to do creamy, if you want to do banana bread or banana pancakes. I love having bananas in my freezer.
Yeah.
See, I don't know. What else is in there? Probably some frozen vegetables, I'd imagine. I'd probably have some frozen salmon in there.
So if you were going to cook tonight, you would stop by a store first to grab something. You're not necessarily a freezer cooker. Like, you don't have a well-stocked freezer.
No.
Yeah.
I'm not a freeze it and wait for later.
Yeah. Or not even prepared meals, but like I personally, I have like 3 proteins at any time in my freezer. So if I'm like, I don't plan like days in advance. I just wake up and go, okay, what's the protein? And then I build out from there. I'll have some vegetables from the garden or the farmer's market. And that's just one method of cooking. And so that's why I ask people, it's a form of pantry cooking, really. Your freezer being kind of an extension of your pantry, right?
I'm a very bad shopper.
Do you not like it? I know a lot of people hate shopping.
I loathe grocery stores.
Yeah.
I absolutely hate them. It's like a phobia. I really truly can't stand them. One of the greatest things about the pandemic was personal space, in my opinion. I loved the only thing, I hated being at grocery stores, but it was so nice being in an aisle all by myself and seeing somebody come down the other end of the aisle, look at me with fear in their face and turn around and leave. I love having space, but
that's funny.
There's just something about grocery stores that just gives me night sweats.
That's
So I
funny.
tend to be a really bad shopper. So when I shop, I go in. If I have a list, I go for it. If I don't, I run around in circles, grab 12 things I don't need, rush out and go, okay, what am I going to get for dinner? Yeah.
Right. So if do you have a favorite comfort food meal right now? Is there anything you've read in a cookbook recently that you're just making over and over again? Or I
Comfort
know
food.
it's
You know what?
summer, it's
Maybe.
hot. What's
Um,
your go-to right now?
well, comfort food wise, I don't know. I don't think I have a I don't think I have a real comfort food anymore. But lately, I have a book here. I did an event with an author named Rosa Jackson, who has a cooking school in Nice, and she wrote
Okay.
a book called Niçoise, and it's wonderful. Uh, I was leafing through it one day, and there was a I have a community garden plot, and in the community garden plot there was, and in the other plots that had been abandoned, there seems to be this bumper crop of Swiss chard growing. And I was flipping through the pages, and there's this recipe for a Swiss chard pie. So, that sounds interesting. But what caught my attention was the pastry dough. You've made a pastry dough.
Mhm.
You have your flour, you have frozen butter and ice water that you're dribbling in, and you're working it with your fingers until you get it to BB size, and then you slowly bring it together, and then you let it set for a while, and then you roll it out and you let it set again. It's a process. So
Yeah.
this was the opposite. It was an olive oil pastry. So it was uh, your flour, and then it was equal parts hot water and extra virgin olive oil. And the hot water helps the fat get into the flour, basically. Um,
Yes.
and since the gluten is already released instantly because of the hot water, you can roll it out to whatever size you need, and then you put it in the refrigerator to set.
Yeah.
And I was so curious about this that I went to my garden and I picked a ton of Swiss chard and cooked it down, followed the recipe verbatim, and started making this Swiss chard
Art.
tart, basically.
I collect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah.
uh, it's become one of my new favorite things to make.
I love it.
Now
That's such a good
now
one.
I'm like, yeah, I'm making this pastry dough for everything. It's great savory pastry dough.
Is it a
Yeah,
bit easier? Because you said the butter is cubed or it's not cubed. It's
well,
just the
no,
hot water and olive oil.
when you're making a
There's no
basic
butter.
pastry dough, there's no butter in this. It's
Okay.
extra virgin olive oil.
Yeah.
So it's equal parts extra virgin olive oil and hot water, and they work together the way that, because when you're making a basic pastry dough with ice water and frozen butter, you
Yeah.
don't want your hands to warm everything up. This is
Yeah.
like the exact opposite. There's no way to mess it up.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And you
had a
can
friend
change
once
the
who
texture.
she was a pastry chef, and she said it was a Ligurian thing. That's Italy, right? Liguria,
Mhm.
Ligu. And she would make this pastry dough and fill it with Swiss chard, and I just thought she was a god. I'm like, you know how to do this stuff? And she's like, just cooking from the garden. I love it.
Yeah,
That's a great
it's like yeah,
recipe.
it's like one more thing that I've kind of got in my arsenal now. So
Yeah.
I make that. That's like a thing that I do. But yeah, I don't think that I have a real comfort food anymore.
Yeah. Is there anything that inspires or motivates you to cook specifically? Or like if you don't feel like it, if you're like, oh, I'm really tired, but oh, I don't really feel like eating out. What's your motivation and inspiration for cooking? Is it health? Is it flavor? Like, oh, I can make it better, or I don't want to spend the money. Do you have an inspiration or a motivation for cooking when you do end up cooking?
Well, health has a lot to do with it. I want
Yeah.
to know what's in my food. I
Yeah.
want to know, it's easy to go out and get something, but you, if you go to a restaurant and you're paying $20 for whatever you're getting, uh, would you want you want to think that it's the best quality ingredients, but most of the time it's just the lowest quality ingredients the restaurant can buy coming
Yeah.
off of a Cisco truck.
I was gonna say.
And yeah, and it's filled with salt, and who knows what else. You got a lot of, not all restaurants, of course, but a lot of them, they'll cut corners by buying some things that are pre-made. In some cases, like they're not going to, they're not going to make a tortilla. They're going to buy pre-made tortillas.
Right.
Most restaurants, most places that are serving something with a tortilla. I'm just saying that as an example. I want to know what's in my food, so I prefer to eat it. And I find that when I go out to eat, I really want to enjoy it. And I got tired. I hate feeling like I have buyer's remorse. Like I just went out and I spent $150 on dinner, and I walk away thinking I could have made that so much better. I could have made that at home. Why did I have to spend that much money on that?
It's the worst.
Well, when you go to a restaurant, you're paying for the ambiance.
Yeah.
But if you didn't like the ambiance and the food was mediocre at best, and it was really expensive, I'd much rather cook for myself. So my motivation is to not have buyer's remorse and to really know what's going into my food. Absolutely. I'd rather make my own pasta, bake my own breads. I like to do everything from scratch.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Matt. I think that is a great way to end this interview. Thank you for being on the show. I appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Cooking from Scratch podcast. I hope you found some fresh ideas to spice up your meals and make your kitchen adventures even more exciting. If you're eager to dive deeper and learn some game-changing tips for effortlessly adding variety to your meals, don't miss my upcoming live masterclass called 6 Easy Ways to Quickly Add Variety to Your Meals. In this 90-minute training, I'll be sharing practical strategies and creative ideas to transform your cooking routine and give you back your time and energy on weeknights. Whether you're a busy professional, a home cook looking to mix things up, or just someone who loves great food, this masterclass has something for you. When you click the link in the show notes or visit www.fasteasydinners.com to reserve your spot today, you'll learn how to turn your everyday meals into something extraordinary. Until next time, keep cooking, keep experimenting, and keep enjoying every bite.